Alright, so let's learn to knit some socks. Now I will link this pattern in the description of the video. You can download this for free. This is a pattern that I came up with using DK weight yarn. Now, let's talk about socks here for a second. Socks are normally knit with sock yarn. It's a 1 weight yarn, it's very thin, and it takes a lot of patience to knit a pair of socks. And some people suffer from what they call second sock syndrome, where by the time you're done with the first sock, you don't really feel like knitting the second one because it took so long to do the first one. So to kind of combat that, I came up with this pattern using a little bit heavier gauge of yarn, DK weight instead of, so this is a 3 weight instead of a 1 weight. And it still gives you a sock that's thin enough to wear, you know, with your shoes. It's still comfortable. You can use worsted weight yarn to knit socks, but I find those to be a little bit uncomfortable to walk on sometimes, and they're a little thick, so it's kind of hard to put shoes on with worsted weight yarn. So this still works, and it's a nice warm sock here. So with this pattern, we are going to knit this from the toe up, which is my favorite way to knit socks. You can, you know, there are patterns that go either way, that start with the cuff and go down, or start with the toe and go up. I like starting with the toe because I don't have to worry about running out of yarn before I finish the sock. You start at the toe, you knit the foot, you turn the heel, and then you start up the leg, and then you can just keep going until you do run out of yarn, or stop whenever it's as long as you want it to be. So this is how this pattern is written. It is a little bit more advanced of a pattern because it uses double pointed needles. So if you're not familiar with double pointed needles, this is a way to learn how to use them. Okay, so I've already knit the first sock in my pair here, and we're going to start the second sock. Now I like this is a self-striping yarn, I like for my stripes to kind of at least be close on both of my socks so they kind of match. If you don't care, you can start your yarn wherever, and your socks can be just coordinating instead of matching. But since I want mine to match up, I'm going to start mine in the same location, or at least a similar location to where I started my last sock. So we see here the sock started where there was a little bit of the dark maroon before it turned into the bright red color. So I'm going to find that location in my yarn here, which is about right here, and that is where I'm going to start. So this pattern is written to use what's called Judy's Magic Cast-On. You can find different videos showing you different types of cast-ons for toe-up socks. Any of them will work. This is just the one that I used here. So I'm going to demonstrate to you how to do that now. So to do Judy's Magic Cast-On, you're going to take 2 of your double-pointed needles. These are a size 3 double-pointed needle. And I'm going to drape my yarn in between them. So I'm going to put the yarn in between the 2 needles, and then the working yarn that is attached to the ball is going to drape over the top needle, and then the other yarn is just going to hang down from that. Alright, then I'm going to take the yarn like I'm doing a cast on, a normal long tail cast on, and the yarn is already over the top yarn, so we're going to put it over the bottom yarn. So I'm going to twist around, take this needle, and my cat has come to say hello. Hello, Nessie. So we're going to twist around to take that bottom needle and wrap it so that the yarn on the top goes in between. And then we're going to do the same with the bottom. We're going to reach down, take the bottom yarn, and wrap it over the top one. Twist around, take the top yarn, and wrap it over the bottom needle. Then take the top one over the bottom yarn. And we're going to keep alternating like that in kind of a figure 8 formation. And our pattern says, excuse me, Nessie, I need to read the pattern here. Our pattern says to cast on 10 stitches on each of the 2 needles, so we're going to have 20 stitches total. So right now I've got 4 on the top and 4 on the bottom. So we can get 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom, Count and make sure. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah. Okay. So now we are going to start knitting these. So we have our stitches cast onto our 2 needles here, and basically what's going to happen is as we add our needles, we're going to start knitting in both directions so that the toe is completely seamed up. We don't have to do any sewing after we're done. It starts with this one middle section and then stitches come down from both sides of it. So we're going to turn our needles around, and you'll notice here that this is kind of, I don't know if you can see that there, it's kind of loose. What I like to do is take this working yarn and kind of twist it with the other yarn just to kind of lock it in place as I'm starting this out. So I'm going to knit 1 round, which is just knitting every single stitch. Alright, so it just finished up that first side. So now we're going to start on the second side. So we turn around here and we're going to work back down this next side. Now when we do this, we're going to add in our 3rd needle or 4th needle to this. So I'll start knitting. I'm going to get half of the stitches, which there's 10 on that side. So when I get the first 5, knit. There's 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'll stop with that needle, grab my 4th one, and knit the remaining 5. And that just makes it easier. It kind of starts into this circular motion, kind of stretches the stitches out a little bit, makes it a little bit easier to get into as we're going through this. So there are my last 5. And that is 1 round completed. So I'm going to turn then, and starting with the second round, we're going to start increasing. So we're going to, we've knit 1 round here, and we're going to start increasing this way to build out the shape of the toe. So I'm going to go ahead and break that yarn off to get it out of the way. All right, so starting with our second round, we have our working yarn here, and we're going to knit into the front and back. Actually, we're going to knit 1 first, then knit into the front and back of the second stitch, and then knit to the last 2 stitches on that half of the round. So we're going to imagine the sock is in 2 halves. 1 needle's on one side, and then we got the other 2 needles on the other side. So we're going to knit the first stitch, and then we're going to do an increase. We're going to knit into the front and back. And we've done that in several other patterns if you've followed those on my channel, where you insert your needle like you're going to knit, you draw up that first stitch, but then instead of dropping it off, you twist around and put your needle into the back of that same stitch and pull up a second stitch before you move it off. And then we're going to knit to last 2 stitches on this half of the round. So we're going to keep going until we get to the last 2 stitches on this first needle. Alright, and then we're going to do this same thing, but in reverse. We're going to knit into the front and back of this second to the last stitch. And then knit that last stitch. Then we're going to turn and start down the next side. Now, this side is 2 needles, so when it says knit to the second to the last stitch on this half of the round, it doesn't mean on the second to the last stitch on this needle, it means to the second to the last on this half, so that would be these on the second needle. So we're going to basically repeat what we did on the other side. We're going to knit the first stitch, knit into the front and the back of the second stitch, and then knit the rest of the ones on this half of the round until we get to the second to the last stitch. So that's the first needle. We're going to start onto the second needle. And then when we get to those last 2 stitches, we'll knit into the front and back. And then knit that last stitch. And then we're back to the beginning where we started. Now, the second row of this increase repeat is just to knit all the stitches. So that one's pretty easy. We're just going to knit fully around this whole round. So we started with 10 stitches per side. Now that we've done our first increase, we should have 12 stitches because we're increasing 1 stitch on either end of each side. So we have 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So that's our first side with our increases on it. Next side should be the same because we increased the same. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the first needle, so that's a good start. And there should be 6 on the second needle as well. Alright, so our first increase was successful there, and you can see where we've started. There's our seam at the beginning of the toe, and we're now building down both sides of it. So we just repeat those 2 rows. So the first row of the repeat is the knit 1, knit into the front and back, knit all the way to the last 2 stitches, and then knit into the front and back and knit 1, and then repeat that on the second side. And then the second row is just knit them all around. You repeat those 2 rows until you have 48 stitches total in your round. So when you get to 48 stitches, you stop increasing, and then you start just knitting every round, knitting in stockinette, until your sock measures 2 inches less than the desired length of your foot. Now, that's the next thing I want to talk about this. You do need to measure your foot, or the foot of the person that you're making this sock for. when you buy commercially made socks, they have elastic in them and they have a lot of stretch to them. Now these have some stretch, but not as much as what an elastic sock would. So there's not a lot of give. You kind of basically just build this sock to fit the exact size of the foot, or maybe a little bit smaller, so it fits snugly around the foot. So you do need to measure the bottom of your foot. So once you're done increasing, you stop the increase and then you just continue knitting until this measures 2 inches less than what you want the entire foot of the sock to be, because that 2 inches will then be taken up with making the heel, which we'll get to here in a few minutes. So work on that and I'll meet you back here. Do your increases when you've got 48 stitches total in your round. That would be 24 stitches on each half of the needles. You stop your increasing and then you start just knitting every single round until it gets to the 2 inches less than what you want your entire sock to be, or the entire foot of your sock to be. I'll meet you back here and we will continue on. Okay, so here's where we are in this pattern now. I have continued knitting in stockinette in the round until the piece measures 2 inches less than I want the finished sock to be. So basically what we have done is knitted from the toe up through the instep of the foot. And this is where we stop here, okay? Now, the next part of this pattern, we are going to actually stop knitting in the round and knit back and forth across just half of the stitches. Okay, so a pattern tells us we are going to knit the first 24, so that would be the first half of the round. So we'll knit these 24 stitches. And then when we get to the other half, we're going to just knit back and forth across those same stitches. And what we're going to do basically is elongate the bottom part of this sock to accommodate for the heel. We're making the heel flap. So we've knit to here. We're now going to stop knitting in the round and we're going to knit just these stitches so that we elongate this for the heel flap. And then we will turn the heel 90 degrees and come up and then begin knitting in the round again and finish the leg of the sock. So we're knitting these first 24 stitches here. Just knitting them like we have been doing everything else, just stockinette in the round, which when you're knitting stockinette in the round, you're just knitting every single row. There's no purling back because you're continually moving in the same spiral, so you're continually knitting on the right side. Okay, so these first 24 stitches are done. For the second half of this round, where we're going to start knitting back and forth, we are going to purl these stitches because we're going to stop knitting in the round and we're going to continue in stockinette. So we'll knit and then we'll purl back again. But we knit the first, or the whole half of the sock. So we'll knit both needles here since we have it split into 2 needles. To do this, we're not going to knit the first stitch. We're just going to slip it purlwise, which means just stick your needle in and just slide it over. And then we're going to knit all the rest of the stitches on this half. So slip 1 and knit 23. Second needle here, so knit the rest of these. Alright, and then once we get to the end, instead of continuing on around, we're going to turn our work and ignore these stitches on the first half and purl back the stitches that we just did. So on the purl rows, we're going to do like we did the the first row, we're going to slip the first stitch and then purl the rest of them. So we'll just purl back across the 23 other stitches after we've slipped the first one. There's the first needle done. And then we knit that next needle. And when we are done with all 24 of these stitches, we will turn our work again, and then we just repeat these 2 rows. These slip the first stitch, knit 23, and then slip the first stitch, purl 23. You repeat those rows 8 more times, so you'll have a total of 9 times you've done this. So 2 rows, repeated 9 times, or completed 9 times, and so you'll have 18 rows of just back and forth on these 2 needles. So I'll do that, and then I'll meet you back here and show you how to turn the heel. Okay, so we have knit the heel flap. You see here that here's where we stopped knitting in the round, and then we've elongated the bottom part of the foot so that we have a extension for our heel. And the next thing we're going to do is called turning the heel. We're going to turn 90 degrees and work up so that we can start forming the leg. So to do that, we're still just going to be knitting back and forth across this half of the stitches, the 24 stitches on the second half. And we're going to be doing short rows. So the first step in this is to knit 14 stitches. So we'll knit the first 14. Which I have these broken up as 12 on each needle, so it'll be the first needle plus 2 stitches on the next needle. So there's our first 12. And then we're going to knit the next 2. And then we're going to stop. We're not going to continue across the row. We're knitting short rows, which means we're going to only knit part way across. So when we get those first 14 knit, we're going to stop, turn our work, and then we're going to slip the first stitch, purl 4, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we are going to purl 2 together. So that means just put the needle through 2 stitches at once. And just purl both of them together. And then we're going to stop and turn our work again. And then the next row is slip 1 stitch, so slip that first stitch, knit 4, there's 1, 2, oops. Split yarn there. And then we are going to slip, slip, knit. So you see there's a little gap here where we slipped the first stitch to begin with. That's how you know where we're going to do our decreases. So we're going to slip, and then slip the other one on the other side of the gap, and then knit those 3 together through the back loop. And then we're going to turn our work again. And we're just going to repeat these 2 rows. And what will happen is we'll keep decreasing until there are only 6 stitches left on the needles. And we'll be ending with a purl row. So keep doing that, and I'll meet you back here after we're done and we have the 6 stitches left. And then I'll show you the next part of this, how we join it all back together again. Okay, so here we are. We have completed our decreases until we have just 6 stitches left on the needles. I've just put them on one needle here to make them easier to see. So the next step in this is that we're going to continue knitting in the round. So what we're going to do is knit these 6 stitches. And then when we get to this long section here, you see where we were slipping as we were knitting our heel flap here, we slipped the first stitch of each row. You can see those elongated stitches there. We're going to pick up and knit a stitch in all 9 of these to continue our round around. And then we'll knit the front needle, and then we'll pick up the 9 stitches along this side as well, and then just continue knitting in the round. So let's do that. Let me show you how we're going to do that here. We'll knit our first 6 stitches. As we're continuing to knit the round here. Alright, and then I'm going to pick up another needle here to help with this. We're going to pick up a knit, and what that means is basically you just stick your needle through that elongated stitch. You see how we turn it to the side and you have the V here on top. We're going to stick it through underneath both legs of that V. We're going to wrap our yarn like we're knitting it, and we're just going to pull up a stitch. And we're going to leave that on the needle. And we're basically just casting on some stitches here. So we'll do that for 9 stitches. There's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the 9th one is right here in the little corner here. There's our 9 stitches. So we've got those cast on. We're just going to leave that needle there. We're going to flip it around and then continue knitting around. We're back to knitting in the round again. So we're back to our front needle on the front half of our sock. So we just continue knitting those first 24 stitches that are on that first needle in the front. You see my cat is pouting because I'm not paying attention to her. So she has to lay across my pattern. Alright, so we're just knitting these first 24 stitches off that very front needle. And then we'll be back to the other side where we have the gap with the elongated stitches, and we're going to pick up 9 more stitches there, which will put us back to the 9 stitches that we previously picked up, plus 9 more, plus the 6 that are already on the needle, puts us back to our original 24 stitches that we had. So same thing, we've got these elongated stitches on the side. We're going to stick our needle under the V, pull up a stitch, and we're going to do that for 9 stitches. once we have our 9 stitches on there, just to evenly distribute these stitches across the 2 needles again, I'm going to go ahead and knit the first 3 stitches off of those 6 that were still on the needle. And then these other 6, or the other 3 that are left, I'm just going to slide back onto that second needle that has that first set of 9 stitches that we picked up. Alright, so now we're evenly distributed across the back, so I'll take my free needle then and finish knitting the round, which is those 3 stitches, and then the 9 that we picked up from before. Once we've done this, that's the hardest part. I'll show you how we've turned the heel, and we're now heading in a 90-degree angle to the rest of the foot, because we're going to start working on the leg. So we see, we have our foot, we have our heel flap, and now we have made the heel turn, which has turned us 90 degrees. We were knitting this way, now we're going to be knitting up this way to create the leg. So once we've done that heel, we're kind of home free here. We're just going to knit in the round until our leg of our sock is as long as we want it to be. So you can go until you run out of yarn, you can go for a certain amount of inches. I like to at least knit the length of the leg to be the same as the length of the foot, so that when I fold it in half, they're the same length. But it's a personal preference. You can go just a couple inches and put a cuff and make it just an ankle sock if you want. Or you can go all the way up to your knees if you want to. That's the beauty of knitting from the toe up. You just keep going until you can run out of yarn, or you decide to stop, whichever's first. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue knitting around this, stocking it in the round until my sock matches this one, and then I'm going to switch to ribbing for the last couple of inches here, which is just knit 2, purl 2, and then we're going to bind off with a stretchy bind-off. So I'll do this, I'll come back and show you how to do the cuff, and then we'll show you how to do a stretchy bind-off so you can actually stretch it open and get your foot in there. So I'll meet you back here once we're ready to start the cuff. Okay, so our sock is almost finished here. I have knitted the leg of it to the length that I want, and then I did not record the ribbing portion, but if you'd like to see that, you can check out one of my previous videos where I show you how to do ribbing. It's a basic 2x2 rib, so it's knit 2 stitches, purl 2 stitches, and then alternate knitting and purling till you get your ribbing. I like to add at least 1.5 inches. I've got close to 2 inches of ribbing here. You want the ribbing to be large enough that it will actually hold your sock up, because this is what's going to be stretchy and grip against your leg to keep your sock from falling down. So you want at least 1.5 inches of ribbing here at the top. So now we need to bind off, and we need to bind off in a stretchy bind-off, and you can find all kinds of different tutorials for stretchy bind-offs on the internet. I'm going to show you how to do the one that I used for this. We want this to be stretchy because it needs to be able to stretch big enough to put your foot into. So if you just bound off straight across, it would be too tight and you would never be able to put this thing on. So we do want to have a stretchy bind-off. So let me show you how to do the stretchy bind-off for this. It's very simple. You're just going to alternate a couple of steps here. So we're going to continue in the pattern. We're going to continue the ribbing here. So we're going to knit the first 2. After you knit 2 stitches though, we are going to either knit through the back or purl 2 together. And I'll show you, you'll know by what you have previously finished. So since I just finished a knit stitch, I'm going to knit these 2 together through the back loop. So all you do is take your left hand needle, slide it into the front of those stitches, and then knit them together through the back loop. Now, the next part of our pattern is purl. So we're going to purl that next stitch, And once again, once you have 2 stitches on your needle, we're going to reduce or decrease that by putting them together. Okay, so if your stitch you just knit was a knit stitch, you do the knit through the back like we just did. But this one is a purl. So since this one is a purl, we are going to purl these together. So you're going to take your left needle, stick it through the back of those stitches so that your right hand needle is in the front. It can be a little tricky sometimes here. So make sure you get both stitches on there. And sometimes what I do is put the needle through the front and then just twist the needles around so that your left needle is going through the back of the stitches, like you're purling them together. And then you just purl those 2 together. So then our next stitch is a purl, so we're going to purl that. And since that was a purl, then we purl these 2 together. So stick that left needle through the back of them and then purl them together. Now the next 2 stitches are knit, so we're going to knit that stitch, and since that stitch was a knit stitch, that means we're going to knit them together through the back loop. So we put our left needle through the front, knit them together through the back loop. Next stitch is a knit, so we knit it, and then knit them together through the back loop by putting our left needle through the front and knitting them through the back loop. And you just continue in that manner, following the pattern, and if the stitch you just knit was a knit stitch, then you knit them through the back loop. If it was a purl stitch, then you purl the 2 together until you get all the way around. And then that will give you this nice stretchy bind-off. And then all you have to do is just weave in your end, and you've got a completed sock.